The story begins with our protagonist waking up to see doctors scrambling. Then, he heard a strange voice in his head as he was wheeled into the operating room. The doctors reported to each other that there had been a change in his head, and his left leg was damaged. And the protagonist's mind began some kind of download that was coming to an end. The so-called system reboot is complete. The Baruda artificial intelligence has been activated. Now we can see Daewha University Hospital, all made of glass panels. And then they let people into some lab one by one, but asked them not to touch anything. One of the humans represented to the others this diagnostic purpose of artificial intelligence. She was developed by Daewha University Hospital. Her name is Baruda. All the people were shocked, understanding what it was, because they also knew about this area. It was all freshmen, and we can see freshman Lee Soo-hyuk. They all claimed it was unbelievable, and the director, whose name was Yang Won-jun, knew that they would react that way. It has the greatest potential among existing diagnostic AIs. He graduated from the 4th best medical university in Korea, and he came to this department just for him. Since medicine is developing very rapidly, the Baruda is still a device far from commercialization. For example, if they download patient data, gender, age, symptoms, time of occurrence, and so on, and enter all the tests done with the patient, then you will be able to find out what kind of disease the person has. Baruda diagnosed pneumonia caused by pneumococci, but unfortunately, the doctors diagnosed tuberculosis. The reason for this error is a numerical error. The Bardu does not possess the 5 senses, so information about the patient is limited. So the commercialization of Baruda will not happen so soon, so you don't have to be careful with it. After which one of them decided to ask why some sounds were coming out of the Baruda. The man smacked himself against the car and noticed that the condition of the Baruda was very strange. He didn't understand why it was happening, even though he was in charge of the software, but he knew it wasn't good. It was decided to order them all to leave the room immediately for security reasons. And all these students noticed that something unusual was going on behind his back with the Baruda. They were all in a panic and didn't know what was going to happen. Maybe it would explode and blow everything up, which caused everyone to run out of there in a panic, not understanding what was going on with the car. But the crowd was running too crowded, and Lee Soo-hyuk fell to the floor, unable to get up. And when everyone ran out, one of the workers wanted to close the door, but Lee Soo-hyuk let it be known that he was still there, while he was running to explain that he fell because of the crowd, and the Baruda behind him was about to explode, which the employees simply could not put everyone in such danger, and slammed the door without waiting for. The software director didn't understand what he was doing, because there was a person there, but he explained that he couldn't put everyone in danger. After the explosion, Lee Soo-hyuk lost consciousness, and in his mind, he heard a voice saying that the reboot was complete. And then this voice said that Barrett's artificial intelligence had been activated, which shocked him. A bunch of windows appeared in front of him with a built-in medical database, which surprised him even more. Are the anatomy textbooks he studied in his freshman year, as well as the therapeutics. He tried to figure out what was going on, and came to the conclusion that it was all he had ever studied, was only 2% loaded, and he finally realized that the Baruda was right in his head. Lying in a hospital bed, with an air supply machine, he started laughing while unconscious. Because of this incident, all the media found out about the Baruda, and started reporting that it is incredibly technologically advanced, but not safe. The Ministry of Health was involved in the development, and many other representatives postponed the process of creating the Baruda. He just can't believe that they are going to put it off. They don't realize that Baruda is their only chance to become the best in medicine. After which they noticed that Lee Soo-hyuk, and assumed that it was one of the side effects of the operation. Another doctor asked what happened, to which he reluctantly replied that their patient was laughing. It was the hospital director, who could not understand how he was laughing even though he was under anesthesia. It turned out that he had a Baruda chip in his head, which they did not pull out because of the risk, but there was no reaction to the foreign substance. And also he would now limp, and they were wondering how to tell his family about it all. But after they told him he was an orphan, the worker got excited and said they were lucky, and then realized he had said too much. Because of this, The director started yelling at him that it was their fault that he hurt himself, and how he even calls himself a doctor, after which the worker wondered where they would get the funds for his treatment, to which the director replied that he would deal with it. They noticed that the machine shows that the patient is conscious, but how? They have administered various drugs. There was no understanding of what they need to do. He is almost conscious, but the employee stated that he did not think it was bad. The director was pondering what to do. Waking up is not an option, since the patient needs more than 6 hours after surgery on his head. But if he wants to wake him up, he should do it sooner. But if he is not breathing on his own after removing the tube, there is no way back. The worker began to report that he had stopped administering the medicine, and Lee Soo-hyuk reacted very well and began to breathe. The director started trying to talk to him, asking his name, if he was okay, and if he could hear him. And Lee Soo-hyuk had an annoying loud noise in his head that said more information was needed. But then it all stopped abruptly. He didn't understand what happened, but there was nothing else in his way. Then he had a message asking him to enter the information in a different way, and it came up because Lee Soo-hyuk said it was too noisy. Lee Soo-hyuk asked if the Baruta could see something, then asked if the eyes were the organ of visual input, and after answering yes, the Baruta's eye became available, began to create a database for each body to collect information. It looks like the Baruta was talking to him. Lee Soo-hyuk wondered if they had to dialogue in this way. The letters were a little blurry, and the system immediately improved the visual effects. He was very excited about what was starting to happen in this, so to speak, dimension, with artificial intelligence. And the director sighed because the press gave him no peace, and now the public, all figuring out who is to blame for the incident. All this time Lee Soo-hyuk breathed on his own, a few days, but did not start to talk. Whether his brain failed pondered the director, when suddenly one of the employees came up to him. "Dr. Shin, where have you been?" the director asked the therapist Shin Hyuk-dae, to which he replied that he was returning from Lee Soo-hyuk's room, and the director was just about to go there. And at the same time I asked him about his condition, and the therapist grudgingly said that he woke up today. The director's surprise was boundless, and he started asking questions about whether he was all right, and whether he could be sent to the press, because their pressure would kill the doctors, to which the therapist told him that his condition was fine. But the director began to ask what could be wrong. As it turned out, Lee Soo-hyuk asked for a textbook and paper, and said he had to study, and he didn't have time. They decided that they needed to check his mental state, because after the explosion, and because of the chip, different things could have happened. Lee Soo-hyuk scratched his ear, and said that apparently someone was discussing him, but the Baruta told him that it had nothing to do with that, and that the cause of the itching was the presence of earwax. The moment the man starts scratching his ear, earwax and hairs spreading inside, Lee Soo-hyuk couldn't stand it, and said shut up, and started asking if he can't write like before, and why he looks like that. Even more infuriating, the explanation was that like he said this kind of image gives more friendliness from Lee Soo-hyuk. The connection between them improved after the visual effects were updated, and then he gave advice to concentrate on studying. An hour earlier this therapist tried to wake up Lee Soo-hyuk, saying it was driving him crazy that he could breathe on his own, but wouldn't wake up. And then he wakes up asking if he recognizes him, whereupon Lee Soo-hyuk asks if he is the head of the department. He started to get up, because he was uncomfortable, but he was told to lie down, because you can't make any sudden movements. After that he realized that his leg was wounded after all. He already knew. He heard indistinct conversations while he was unconscious. Baruta began to explain that the leg is severely traumatized. There is deep nerve damage in the fibula, which will lead to permanent limitation of movement. Lee Soo-hyuk replied that he knew that, and the Baruta was surprised, saying that according to his report, there was over a 90% chance that he didn't know. He snapped and shouted not to piss him off, and the therapist couldn't understand what was going on, because he hadn't seen the Baruta. He realized that he had said too much, and he started making excuses that he was a little irritated because of the pain in his head and leg. The therapist offered to help pull out the urine collection tube, but Lee Soo-hyuk refused and said he could do it himself if he was given a syringe. Honestly, it's unbearable, because before he only pulled it out of patients who would have thought he'd have to do it himself. But even more infuriating is that insufferable grumpy boy, Baruta. Lee Soo-hyuk says he's in a lot of pain, so don't let him talk to him. The best medical artificial intelligence, created by the best Korean companies, with the help of the best specialists. They started telling him that they had delegated his duties to his colleagues, so don't let him worry. But by June 3rd, the therapist asked him if he needed anything, and he said it was okay if the rules say you can't bring it. He said that in that case, he needed a laptop. But Baruta started saying one word without stopping textbooks. Lee Soo-hyuk got angry at him and told him to be quiet, and the Baruta said that study was necessary. The therapist of course noticed this and asked what was wrong with him, to which Lee Soo-hyuk excitedly started waving his hand and replied that it was nothing special. Baruta kept repeating that he wanted textbooks, thus driving Lee Soo-hyuk crazy, who wanted something else. And in the end, he said he needed textbooks and scientific publications. The therapist was surprised and asked why he needed them, to which he replied with a crazy look that it was because he was ignorant and wanted to learn a little. But he still went to get his books at Lee Soo-hyuk's request, even though it was very strange. Lee Soo-hyuk got depressed because he barely survived. What study? Baruta realized that it seems he doesn't like to study. Baruta began to explain that the purpose of his existence is to become the best artificial intelligence in diagnosis. For this you need data. But won't it be hard for you to become one now? Asked Lee Soo-hyuk, thinking about it, in which case Baruta will edit the target to make his only way of inputting and outputting data. Lee Soo-hyuk, the best doctor in the world. Baruta took it as a rejection and didn't understand why. Lee Soo-hyuk started explaining that it's not that he didn't want to, but it's too complicated. He still has his own life. In that case, with information about Lee Soo-hyuk, he will show what kind of doctor he would like to be. Baruta displayed the video like a projector, as a hologram, which made Lee Soo-hyuk very surprised. In this video, people were talking about how the profession of doctor is no longer so. You need to become a doctor as soon as possible, and then quit and enjoy life. Baruta asked if this was the doctor he wanted to be, but he got embarrassed and said he didn't want to be, and then he was just drunk. Based on this statement, Lee Soo-hyuk's nickname is rectified as Trash, which Lee Soo-hyuk definitely did not like. After that, Baruta asked him again what kind of doctor he wanted to be. Garbage? He couldn't stand the pressure and started screaming that he realized he had to become a better doctor. You can just make it your goal to become the best doctor in the world. He tried to reassure himself. We are rescheduled for 5 days ahead. It's been 5 days since he was transferred to a regular room. No neurological abnormalities. Thank God he recovered quickly. The main thing is that nothing happens to him. That's what he was thinking at the time. The very therapist he thanked came out of Lee Soo-hyuk's room. The director noticed him. The director started a dialogue, asking what Lee Soo-hyuk was saying, if he had mentioned anything about compensations, to which the therapist disappointedly replied that he would rather talk about money. The director was surprised and wanted to know what he said then. Lee Soo-hyuk asks that he be made an attending physician quickly. He really wants to work. The director asked if the RN had said that they would give him leave for 3 months. It turned out that yes, but he still wants to work. He also added that the director hasn't seen his eyes yet. It makes him shiver. He stares at one point, then he frowns and grumbles. He has read so many textbooks and scientific papers that there is already a mountain piled up. This madman even reads histories of diseases. The director took him on his shoulders and said he knew he wouldn't be director for long. If he says that Lee Soo-hyuk is crazy, then let him make sure he doesn't do anything. He's your student. The director decided to let him do whatever he wanted, and it was the director's responsibility to keep an eye on things. His oxygen saturation is normal, and he can breathe at a normal rate, but he said he's just sad. He could rest for 3 months, and Baruta decided that he needs experience, lacks knowledge, can't do anything. Baruta suggested that he was so much oppressed that the doctor became a patient, but Lee Soo-hyuk asked not to say so. In that case, rejoice? Lee Soo-hyuk said that feelings can't be controlled. Baruta said he'll remember that. Lee Soo-hyuk began to prepare for his rounds at the hospital, which usually take place at 5 p.m. He said he would do it, so we have to work hard, no matter what. The supervisor realized that it seemed like rounds time, and hoped that nothing like that would happen. He noticed Lee Soo-hyuk at the computer in the hallway, and asked what he was doing, to which he said he was analyzing patient data. So that's it, said the manager, and he thought that yes, the most important thing for the attending physician is to know the patient's medical history, but he worries about him. There were two more people the professor was about to say. One was Hwang Sung-woo, and the other was Yu Ji-sang. Since everyone had already gathered, they decided to go around the patients, the four of them. That's what Lee Soo-hyuk was preparing for. They decided to distribute the patients after the departure, and the Baruta began to whisper something in his ear. Baruta smirked and started to tell Soo-hyuk that it's about to start, and he should be ready. They were walking down the hall, and the worker was telling them that a patient in the first room had been admitted with a fever from the emergency room. As the test showed, he had no symptoms other than non-specific gruel and sputum, and the flu test was negative. He asked what diagnosis was suspected. So far only a fever of undetermined origin, they told him. The superintendent asked the others. One said he didn't know, and Lee Soo-hyuk didn't want to say even if he did, because that would be suspicious. Now asked him, and he began to repeat after Baruta that of course he knows everything. They were all surprised, and even angry, from not understanding how he could know this if even they don't know. Baruta told him not to worry, but just repeat the words after him, and he'll get out of it. Now the manager was in complete shock. How can a newcomer know what he can only guess? Maybe he is crazy. And he repeated what Baruta said. It's leptospirosis, Weil's disease, and infectious disease. These supposedly experienced doctors had no idea what this disease was, and this was the first time they had heard of it. In fact, one of the professor's assumptions was also Weil's disease, caused by leptospira. He asked why he had such thoughts. Baruta started telling him to think about why he suspected her. He had read about her 2 days ago. And then Lee Soo-hyuk suddenly began to see all the information about Weil's illness, and the data from Park Ki-tae's chart. 2 hours earlier, we can see Soo-hyuk reflecting on the fact that there are only 12 people under Professor Shin-hyuk-tae's treatment. Baruta recommends Park Ki-tae and Jean Chul as patients. They were not diagnosed. Lee Soo-hyuk understood that he too must train in treating the sick. How does he know who will be given to him? He needs to know everything first. Baruta informed Soo-hyuk that this patient's data had been saved and he needed to move on to the next patient, even though he hadn't even had time to read. And it turned out that all the data was preserved, but Soo-hyuk still could not explain based only on those data. Baruta decided to do everything himself again, and they didn't understand why he started behaving this way. And then he suddenly begins to tell all the necessary information at a fast pace and in a structured way. After the story he continued, today, after 4 days of fever, the blood test showed an elevated level of bilirubin. Compared to yesterday's analysis in the emergency room, you can clearly see an increase in its content. If you take his medical records, you can understand that he was jaundiced, and if you read the complaints, the pain was concentrated in the back and lower leg. The professor was very surprised, because he behaved so naturally, like a long-time general practitioner. He doesn't have something like a Baruta in his head, he thought, and so, Soo-hyuk is not crazy, he's a genius. The professor understood that if he was a genius, one could understand why he was acting like a madman. He already had such acquaintances. Soo-hyuk surprised himself while he was talking, and after he took apart all the symptoms, it's clear why everything points to Weil's disease. Baruta said that it is not difficult. He is fully trained to work with documented information. The professor asked where Soo-hyuk ranked in terms of grades. When he graduated, he was in 4th place, which was surprising. He was surprised that he wasn't in 1st place. But considering that the future of therapy is far from rosy, you should be grateful for the person in 4th place as well. And when they asked him what treatment he would prescribe, he made a mean face, and they all got scared. One of those guys asked if they should still listen to him. Should they go around further? But the professor said it's better not to touch him yet. After explaining the course of treatment, the professor realized that he was very careful in the selection of antibiotics and did not give a single wrong answer. And he decided that in that case Park Ki-tae's patient will be taken care of by Soo-hyuk. After that, he's worth it. The professor decided to check if he was really a genius. So he told him to take care of another patient and said that if he could diagnose him correctly, he would spare him from duty for 100 days. These two guys were very surprised that a first-year resident was given the patient for which they were assembling a concilium. Before it was impossible, he doesn't care if he gets off duty. If he succeeds, he'll have a chance to compete with the professor. He decided he had to jump at the chance. So he said he would try as hard as he could. They decided to take the case because they spent too much time on one patient. Further examination passed without incident. After the professor left, he returned satisfied with gaining his trust. How good it was, if that. But one of those guys started to get on him, saying that if he said he didn't know, then Soo-hyuk should say so too. And the other started to leave, but he stopped him, asked where he was going. He got scared and apologized. Baruta couldn't understand why this man was acting this way, because he diagnosed it correctly, and Soo-hyuk said it wasn't that. And if he didn't know, then don't speak instead of him anymore. He noticed that Soo-hyuk turned his gaze away, and he got angry and swung his leg at him, and asked where he was staring when the older man was talking to him. But he stopped, saying he was lucky that he was handicapped and couldn't hit him. So he started hitting the other one, and said that if he was hurt, then let him teach his friend how to behave properly. After which he began to say he didn't understand how they got such scum. They annoy him just thinking about them. And then someone comes up from behind him. He starts shouting who dares to cough when the second-year-old is telling off the first year. It turned out to be the director, and this guy realized that he was screwed for what he was doing to the newbies. And then we see the superintendent telling the director that Lee Soo-hyuk seems to be a genius. He was just surprised. He also added that Soo-hyuk could be the future of their therapy department. The director was intrigued. Soo-hyuk hesitantly said hello to the director, and he somehow said that with this future, they would be shut down. The director found out from his roommates that he used to be different, and he became that way after he hurt his head. He realized that apparently this guy is training newbies. You can't do that, especially with Soo-hyuk. What if his marbles get behind his rollers and he stabs someone? So you can't let anything happen. You can't let problems arise. But not this. There's only one way out of this situation. The director said he would like to talk to Soo-hyuk alone. If they don't mind, of course. Nothing serious happened between them, right? The kid was very happy about it, and quickly answered that nothing had happened, and the others stood there in incomprehension. He offered Soo-hyuk a coffee, because they hadn't seen each other for so long, and those guys were surprised to hear that. But Soo-hyuk agreed. The sophomore was curious about his relationship with the principal, how he knew him, but they both didn't know the answer, and they came to the conclusion that in fact he works there through connections with the director. The coffee salesman also said hello to the director, and they began to choose what to drink. People around started to wonder what the director was doing in the cafe, and wanted to know who he was drinking coffee with. He tried to remember where they left off, and yet he could. He began to ask how he was doing in therapy, and the director noticed that Soo-hyuk wasn't quite all right. He was looking somewhere away chewing on a tube. But it's like he woke up and said he'd only worked one day, so he can't say anything yet. The director also added not to lose heart that he now has to walk with a cane, because therapists have jobs that do not require a lot of movement. And then he realizes that he took too much time from Soo-hyuk by talking about it. So Soo-hyuk says that then he'll go back to the department. Lastly, he said that if someone bothers him, he shouldn't do anything, but just tell him, and Soo-hyuk took it as a concern. When Soo-hyuk answered well and thanked him, he seemed to say it with a smile, because he was laughing at him. And eventually the director did leave, but in truth, leaving Soo-hyuk to contemplate life. Baruta starts telling Soo-hyuk that now is not the time to relax and waste time, as he does now. But Soo-hyuk can't focus on the conversation because of him. But he said he gave advice to make them understand each other better, but he only got in the way. He also added that it was time to stop drinking coffee and start treating that patient, But Soo Hyuk's only wish was silence for at least a day. But Baruta argued that if he shut up, Soo Hyuk would never figure out the patient's diagnosis, and the fact that he was right made it even more infuriating. Now we can see some kind of meeting where they say that probably some people already know what they are meeting for. The one who brought everyone together was Kim and Soo, third-year resident, and the reason for their meeting was Lee Soo Hyuk, that he got in through a bribe. Everyone was shocked and couldn't believe what this third-year-old said. It was outrageous. One of them started saying that it looks like Soo Hyuk is untouchable, and he got a picture of him and the director having coffee in a cafe. They also have a picture where he clapped him on the shoulder, although he is not a friendly man, and they decided to ask what the director was talking about then. From that first year, they found out that the director said to tell him right away if Soo Hyuk was bothering anyone. Everyone was surprised by this. Some suggested that he was his secret son, and the third year asked if anyone had any information about Soo Hyuk, and one did raise his hand. It was the freshman. His name was Yoo Ji-sung, and he was asked to tell what he knew. He knows he was an orphan, so he worked part-time, and when he lived at university, he was a tutor, not enough scholarship to live on. The third year wondered how he could be a tutor during his studies. He might not have enough time for her, and he noticed that Soo Hyuk was in 4th place in terms of grades. The freshman was asked if he saw Soo Hyuk tutoring, but he said no, and the others couldn't understand how he got 4th place working as a tutor. But it still looks like his son. It's suspicious that he's still not married at his age, and they share the same last name. Because of this, they finally decided that Soo Hyuk is the director's son. They are all literally freaking out about the job. Soo Hyuk's ear itched, but he immediately started trying to justify it by saying it just itches, and no one's talking about it now. Baruta wants to tell him not to pick his ear. He said straight out, stop picking, because it's a bad habit. Now it looks like he's starting to tell Soo Hyuk off for that too, because earwax becomes a good medium for bacteria and viruses when it comes into contact with the environment. Soo Hyuk said that he knows it himself, after which the Baruta made a face of disgust that he knows but further treats his ears like that. He noticed that Baruta is a fast learner, and now he can change facial expressions. Baruta explained that he is constantly evolving thanks to deep learning technology. Soo Hyuk was in front of Kim Jin-chul's room. Seeing the signs on his room, he was wary, not knowing what to expect. The same Kim Jin-chul, 49 years old, went to the emergency room 4 days ago with shortness of breath and cough, and was admitted yesterday with a fever of 39. Is being treated with the antibiotic amoxicillin, with no improvement. Chest x-rays showed no pneumonia. Soo Hyuk asked Baruta if there was anything confusing about the diagnosis, to which he told him that not at the moment. We need more information. He asked his wife if his cough had worsened. As it turned out it had, and after hospitalization his condition worsened. At the time of treatment, the oxygen saturation was 95%. After it went down to 90, they can hardly maintain 95 with the help of the machine. Medications are coming in as much as they should. All the numbers from the tests indicate an inflammatory process. Other than that, there is nothing unusual. The fact that the neutrophil count is elevated confirms the infectious nature of the disease. The emergency department took a blood test, but it takes 10 days to get the results. But the problem is what can happen before they get the results. He is no longer young. What is the causative agent of this disease? If the antibiotic is not administered accordingly, he will surely die. During his rounds, the head of the department said exactly if the temperature does not go down by Sunday, replace the antibiotic with levofloxacin. But levofloxacin is a quinolinic PrEP drug with a wide range of uses. There is a possibility of improvement with its use. However, it is something other than a bombardment of the body. Soo Hyuk asked if it is true. Baruta does not know, but he claimed that there is not enough information, and he can only conclude pneumonia. Even if you listen through the stethoscope, the x-ray showed inflammation in the lower lobe of the left lung. There is a change in breath sounds in this area. Turned out to be the first lung auscultation for Baruta. What does he expect from him? He will keep it all in the archive. The patient's wife started coughing too, and Soo Hyuk got worried about her, and she started saying that she also started coughing a few days ago. He was surprised, and said that this simply cannot be, then decided to ask if she had not taken off the mask. And after a negative answer, he decided to offer to leave the room first. Soo-hyuk asked how long she was in the room. It turned out that about 10 minutes, and also that their daughter was there during the day. He decided to consult with Baruta about it. It would be correct to check the daughter's symptoms. There is a high probability that it is an extremely pathogenic bacteria. The woman began to answer the question of how long they were with their daughter. They themselves are from the province, and after her husband got sick she stayed with her daughter, trying to find out if her daughter was feeling well. The woman said she would come soon, and she did. When she came to ask her mother how her father's condition was, her mother told the truth, and Soo-hyuk wondered, because their daughter has a healthy complexion, she doesn't look sick at all, there really aren't any symptoms. He realized that they had missed something somewhere, and their theories were wrong. So he had to go back to the beginning. Baruta was not confused, and said it was worth taking tests from his wife, because she looked unhealthy in any case, after which he immediately offered to have her examined for her own safety. There is a gurgling sound in the lower lobes of the lungs. Even without experience, he can tell that it is extensive pneumonia. But she caught bacterial pneumonia so quickly? But is it possible to catch it at that rate? Baruta said there is a possibility that she was not infected by Kim Jin-chul. They didn't travel anywhere, which means the source could be in their hometown. Soo-hyuk started to ask the Baruta in which city such an infection could go. The infection is too fast. It would definitely be covered in the news, but it was up to him to find out. Of course, it is very difficult, but if he can diagnose this patient correctly, it will open the way to the professorship. Baruta started saying that Soo-hyuk is very mercenary, but he's on his side anyway. Soo-hyuk informed the woman that she was suspected of having pneumonia, and since she was no longer a visitor, they had to go to the emergency room. He will also help her with her registration, so she can be examined right away, without having to wait too long. She wanted to know if it was serious. Baruta immediately told Soo-hyuk to tell her that it could kill her, but he decided to check it out first, and just in case her daughter should also go with them. Since it's late, you'll have to wait a bit. There are usually a lot of people there at this time. And in the department, just as Soo-hyuk thought, a man named Bearded, who is a resident of the department, came. Soo-hyuk pretended not to know that he had arrived. Baruta remembered that Soo-hyuk checks every time he works today. He pisses off everyone in the department, and the fact that he was so friendly was definitely alarming, after which he asked if Soo-hyuk was looking for something. As it turned out, he acted that way because he had one thought in his head, and that was that Soo-hyuk was the director's son. Soo-hyuk began to explain that they were relatives of his patient, and it seems they were infected, and he would like to do tests. The man agreed to help. He thanked the bearded man, and he heard back that he was not to be thanked, for he helps everyone, and Soo-hyuk felt as if he had been drinking. It was really pneumonia, but unlike the mother, the daughter's lungs look clean. The wife's neutrophils are elevated. It is definitely bacterial pneumonia. Soo-hyuk begins to worry why he is silent. Baruta says he has identified several options. If the source of infection is not human, there is a chance that only Kim Jin-chul, the main carrier, and Oh Jin-kyung are infected. Soo-hyuk started walking up to them, and her daughter said her mom's cough was getting worse, and she didn't know what to do about it. Cough rate increased, and Baruta recommends the use of artificial lung ventilation. Oxygen saturation dropped to 93%. Soo-hyuk decided to ask if she had visited a livestock farm or a contact zoo lately, but she had not been to such places. But her daughter remembered that they had a pet at home. Soo-hyuk had to find out what kind of pet it was. Her mother remembered it. It was a simple little animal. Soo-hyuk bluntly said it was an important question, and he should know exactly what animal, but she tried to hide, saying there was nothing special. He started calling the bearded man because he had something to tell him. The bearded man immediately got mad, not understanding why the hell he was calling him, but he almost immediately pretended to be an angel and asked what he wanted. Soo-hyuk asked for a diagnosis of the patient. The bearded man specified which one. He went on to talk to him on the phone to find out information that the patient Kim Jin-chul, psittacosis, replace antibiotics, and in his thoughts, he was incredibly angry at Soo-hyuk because he didn't know what psittacosis was, had never even heard of it. Psittacosis is an infectious disease transmitted from poultry, with fever, lung damage, etc., and improper treatment can be fatal. For a doctor, the probability of encountering this disease is extremely low. However, this must be it, because they said that they have a parrot, the probability of 99%. Baruta recommended therapy with tetracycline antibiotics, and Soo-hyuk agreed that this should be done, but we need to get permission to replace the antibiotics from the bearded man. I don't want to, but I have no other choice. An antibiotic is a drug that has a stronger effect on the health of the patient. The wrong prescription of antibiotics is often fatal. He's at it again, they thought. According to the rules of the first, it can only consult with a more experienced resident. Baruta said that now is not the right time to think, to which Soo-hyuk agreed. And that's when he went to make that call, when he realized he simply had no other choice. And when the bearded man picked up the phone, Soo-hyuk didn't expect him to have such a friendly voice, but he started to say what he wanted to say. After Soo-hyuk told him everything he wanted to know, the man told him that he was now in the emergency room, and told him to tell the department himself. He's in the hospital now, and you can call him on the extension phone. He just threw it. Soo-hyuk realized that this asshole is forcing him, a first-year student, to report to this department. How does he even have the conscience? Although he decided not to be on the negative, and find the positive, that it is even better, and if necessary, he will report back. And that way he can earn trust. It can be a good chance for him, and he will be a step up. Baruta again pointed out that he really only had selfish motives, and Soo-hyuk just told him to shut up. The director told reporters that Lee Soo-hyuk has recovered, and in doing so, he has started to perform the duties of an attending physician, and said not to go to the hospital and not to disturb the sick, because it's an extra hassle with all this press. The manager supported the director by saying that he did everything right, and the director said that the Baruta is not yet usable anyway, and it will be launched without too much fuss. Did Tewa Electronics tell you that? The director said that they were more scared than anyone else. They were going to sell it all over the world, saying if Soo-hyuk is bad, he seems to be a pretty good thinker. The first time a first-year resident has ever seen a Weil's disease identified by a resident. The director denies it, saying that he is just crazy. Recently saw him and noticed that he constantly stares. At one point, the director tried to convince the director, but it was useless. After which the head, he began to say that they do not have such a big age difference with the director, and he replied that why he thought to equalize them because of the good attitude towards him. And then someone called, which made the director angry, telling him to answer, and he noticed that it was the number of their hospital. It said it was the therapist Shin Hyung-tae. The director was of course angry but tried to calm down. And then you hear the words that it's resident Lee Soo-hyuk, which made the director choke on his coffee. The director immediately started claiming again that he was schizophrenic, calling at this hour and yelling into the phone, "If you ask him to go, do not go in any case, or he will stab you." Baruta told Soo-hyuk that he was talking very loudly for no reason. He explained that it was because he was worried and started to say that he had called because he wanted to report the patient's condition. He asked if the professor was busy, while he told the director that Soo-hyuk wanted to report on the patient's condition. Soo-hyuk started talking about the patient, Kim Jin-chul, male, 49 years old, suspected of psittacosis. Should the antibiotic be changed? They both wondered what made him think it was psittacosis. What pointed it out to him? They asked him directly. And now for the most important part. The patient has breathing problems. The X-ray showed blackouts in the lower part of the left lung. Blood tests showed infectious nature of the disease, which allowed to determine bacterial pneumonia. Using amoxicillin from the penicillin group did not help to get rid of the fever, which means that the infection could not have been caused by contact with another person. There are reasons why amoxicillin is first used, but when it doesn't work, you have to look for a replacement. Soo-hyuk thinks correctly, pondered the professor. Also, the patient's wife, Oh Jin-kyung, began to have similar symptoms around that time. We had an examination today in the emergency department, and received a positive result. The director asked how he knew that, and their daughter, Kim Se-hee, who was in contact with them at the time of their symptoms, has no health complaints and tests show no abnormalities. The professor pondered, it is good that the collected anamnesis is akin to solving a mystery, the joy of knowing that the disparate facts point to a single diagnosis. This is the pleasure of being a therapist. And what thoughts did that give you? Asked the professor, to which Soo-hyuk replied that he concluded that the possibility that the disease was transmitted through water. It turns out that Kim Jin-chul and Oh Jin-kyung have a parrot. If it's psittacosis, that explains why they are infected, and Kim Se-hee, who had contact with her parents, is not. So he made this diagnosis. The professor said to wait, turned off the microphone, and started telling the director that isn't this above all praise? His logic, he had never heard such an anamnesis, not only from residents with 3 years of experience, but even graduate students. But the director said that he was just lucky. It looks like he can be sent to a concilium next week, the professor said, and the director got angry, telling the professor not even to dare say such a thing. What is the problem? He analyzed the patient perfectly, and he has good logic. The director said that there will be doctors from other hospitals. If he does something wrong there, they will be in trouble. The professor realized that the director could not be persuaded, no matter how hard he tried. So he was upset that such talent was being lost. The supervisor turned the microphone back on and started talking about how everything was clear, and let Soo-hyuk change the medicine for an antibiotic. The professor also added that Soo-hyuk has done a good job, and he is on duty tomorrow, so if he needs to confirm the diagnosis, he should feel free to call him. It all worked out the way Soo-hyuk wanted, so he filled out the hospitalization paperwork for Oh Jin-kyung, prescribed doxycycline for her and Kim Jin-chul. Now, if it works, there will be an improvement over the weekend. And Soo-hyuk remembered the professor's words that he had done a good job. Soo-hyuk was definitely happy to hear that. Baruta noticed that Soo-hyuk raised the corners of his lips and asked why he did it. Soo-hyuk himself was surprised at his attentiveness and said that he was surprisingly bad at explaining the anamnesis. But now the mood has lifted. The Baruta directly said that he likes to hear praise, but he explained that it is not just praise. The head of the therapeutic department is a very influential person. He's a brilliant doctor himself, but his wife is none other than the daughter of the CEO of Daewoo Electronics, and it's already predicted that Shin Hyung-tae will be the next director of the medical center, and Soo-hyuk is in good standing with him. Isn't that a social elevator? That way he can really become a professor. In this endeavor, Barao support him, and Soo-hyuk said that he might not have added in this, after which he changed to such an aspiration, I support you. But Soo-hyuk suggested that they no longer talk. He walked into a room where there were a bunch of doctors, some eating noodles, some drinking coffee, but they all knew it was bad. They all immediately hustled and tried to leave the room as quickly as possible, pretending that something had happened. He ended up staying in the office by himself, because no one wanted to deal with him, because they were convinced he was the director's son. But he decided to write it off as everyone had things to do. Soo-hyuk remarked that it wasn't even 10 o'clock yet, so he would fill out his medical records and go to sleep. Baruta immediately asked if he would still be studying. He replied that he was on call tomorrow, and it was his first call in the emergency department. So isn't that a more serious reason to study? What you learned today could be the deciding factor in saving someone's life. Soo-hyuk still agreed with Baruta, and he began to say that he just wanted to bring him to the point that he is the only source of input that affects his manner of speech. Whatever it is, Soo-hyuk definitely doesn't like studying, and Soo-hyuk from his memories wasn't like that. So what happened? Saying this, he was coming out of some building, and noticed that he seemed to have left his wallet in the office. I've been in a constant state of prostration lately. Maybe it's because I didn't get enough sleep, young Soo-hyuk pondered. If only he could do less tutoring, he would have more time to study and relax. But when he came to the door, he heard people inside talking about him, how good he was. One of them said that he hadn't seen anyone more dedicated than him. He was running around like a squirrel in a wheel, the other agreed. and commented that none of the students studied as hard as he did, so they felt a little sorry for him. He tried so hard but still would not become a professor. The third asked what he meant. He began to explain that to become a professor now, you have to spend at least 4 to 5 years. And will he be able to pay for a master's degree all that time? And what about us? Our parents can help us. It's not a problem for us. But Soo-hyuk was lost and no one gave him a helping hand because he's an orphan. But he knew that in this world nothing can be achieved by efforts alone. But he had no idea that he would not even have a chance. What kind of dreams? He just wanted to earn. While Soo-hyuk was telling his story of the past, the Baruta fell asleep, and Soo-hyuk started judging him, that he asked himself, and fell asleep, because he doesn't even have such a need as sleep. He explained that he wasn't interested, so he unknowingly dozed off. But he still understood what he meant. Soo-hyuk was definitely angry at this attitude. Simply put, in this world, he can't become a professor without money. Is that right? Soo-hyuk said that's pretty much it. Baruta asked the question, does he now think that he cannot become a professor? But the answer was no, because everything has changed, from thinking to opportunities. Whether he likes it or not, now he has the Baruta, now everything is in his hands. What about the money? Now he has the power with which he can move mountains. Why then is the man who realized this going to just go to bed without studying? To which Soo-hyuk began to ponder, maybe spit on this power, and just rip the Baruta out of his head. In the morning he woke up to an annoying sound that the Baruta was making. Soo-hyuk asked what he was doing. As it turned out, he had replayed from memory the sound Soo-hyuk hated the most. He asked why get on his nerves in the morning. He said it was already time to get up. But it was only 6 a.m., and he asked to set the alarm for 6 a.m. 50 minutes. But the Baruta decided that was too late. He's on duty tonight. Would it kill Baruta if he slept? He already has that bastard as a partner. But Baruta said that Soo-hyuk can't sleep anyway. There will be a lot of patience. He decided to get up because he couldn't sleep because of the Baruta. He took it as gratitude, which made Soo-hyuk angry and asked him to shut up. Soo-hyuk came to the woman, they greeted, and he asked her how she was feeling. The answer pleased him, because she said she was much better. She seems to be coughing less, maybe it's just a good mood, and she has a blush on her face. It looks like the antibiotics worked well. He told her that he had already been to her husband, and he was feeling much better, and she was very happy about the news, because she was very worried. At 7 o'clock Soo-hyuk went out for breakfast and ate well. He's in a good mood today because Kim Jin-chul and Oh Jin-kyung are feeling much better, and he can also eat breakfast in peace after such a long time. Baruta asked him, wasn't it good that he got up early because of him? He was right that it was better that way, wasn't he? And then some phone rang, and Soo-hyuk realized that sooner or later it had to happen. But why now? He answered the phone and was told that a patient, Lee Ji-eun, had arrived, 45 years old. More skilled care was requested, and she was transferred to us from another hospital. A mass in the abdomen was determined, and weight loss. Soo-hyuk pondered the data he had been given, a mass in the abdomen and weight loss, and realized it looked like cancer, then said he would be right down. Then he remembered that the goat also needed to be told. He told him that there was a patient in the emergency room, and he completed his assignment. As he realized it was cancer, he told Soo-hyuk to go down and look at it. Then they would record that it was a hematoma. But Baruta started saying it's not cancer, and Soo-hyuk started saying that they are going to diagnose cancer, and he can do anything with it if he says it's not. But Baruta claimed that there is no overlap. You can't say it's cancer. If it's a cancerous tumor, then the intestines should already be blocked. Soo-hyuk thought about it and realized that, indeed, something doesn't add up. Come to think of it, she also has a weight loss. But she didn't say she didn't eat. If you look at the CT scan, you can see the area where the tumor is located. The feces have already passed. The intestine is narrowed. But there is clearly no overlap. You jerk, you should have said that information earlier, said Soo-hyuk. But Baruta replied that Soo-hyuk is very slow thinking, so his information processing speed is also slow. In any case, there is a high probability that it is not cancer, so he recommends postponing the transfer of the patient to the hemato-oncology department. That's right. But he just can't, because that idiot sitting next to him is 100% convinced that it's cancer. If he says something, there's no telling how this jerk with a horrible temper will react. He's already done the paperwork anyway, and you don't have to say anything. She was also diagnosed with cancer at the previous hospital anyway. Besides, he's only in his first year of residency. Even if he misdiagnoses, he'll just get away with it. After which Baruta decided to ask if he was satisfied with such a start in his career. Is he such a lowlife? If treating a patient for cancer in the absence of cancer, it will cause great harm to her health, can he let it slide? Didn't he set a goal to become a better doctor? And because of some little thing he will stop? This man smugly began to write that it was a hematoma, and was convinced of it, but he still took the will in his fist, for he was going to be the best doctor in the world, and save people, not ruin them for himself, and stopped him. The man asked why he did that. He was already scared, and Soo-hyuk apologized, saying he didn't understand why himself, and he realized something was wrong, because Soo-hyuk thought the jerk would call him names and hit him a couple of times. The man himself began to reflect that he had almost called him a bad name and beat him. It's good that he held back. He was told not to touch that freak Soo-hyuk. Before the director gets to him, he's sure to get beaten up by Chief Kim In-soo and Chief Pharmacist Kim Jin-young. If it wasn't for the director, he would have beaten Soo-hyuk as hard as he could, but he politely asked what happened. Soo-hyuk directly started saying that there is a high probability that it's not cancer. What made him laugh? And he said he had more experience after all, not cancer. Is that possible? The patient just lost 10 kilos? You're talking nonsense, Soo-hyuk. He was worried because he was discouraged by a disease he had never heard of. But still, a novice is a novice. Listen carefully. I'll tell you everything myself. The Baruta asked Soo-hyuk to hit this man, and he wanted to do it himself. He started pointing at the picture and saying, you see, if you look carefully, you can see folds around the edges. That's a distinctive feature of cancer. Baruta said he had no idea what folds are, but they cannot be called a specific sign of cancer. And here, you see, they're increasing. It's a cancerous tumor. Baruta went on to say that the CT scan did not show a clear obstruction to be able to conclude cancer. For such a mass to be colorectal cancer, there must be a malignant tumor present. She also lost 10 kilos. What else could she lose 10 kilos in a month? Congratulations, Soo-hyuk. I have met a more illiterate person than you. He denies all currently known information about cancer. Soo-hyuk asked why he is bringing it here. This man asked what his expression was. Do you still think it's not cancer? What kind of argument are you making? Baruta explicitly said that the absence of a malignant tumor is the main argument to begin with. Soo-hyuk was surprised to ask if these are all arguments. Baruta replied that it is one, but a serious one. Soo-hyuk told him that the patient's lack of obstruction was asymptomatic and was not detected by the CT scan. He began to say that it was possible, and then wondered if it was possible. Then what do you think she has? If not cancer, he asked, no longer knowing if he was right in his conclusions. Baruta started saying that because the processing speed has slowed down, more time is needed, but he thinks it's an infectious disease. This man looks cool and starts saying, if you work in an infectious disease department, you have an infection again? What nonsense! If we talk about you, you're stuck up because you guessed the disease twice correctly. He as his mentor can give advice. But Soo-hyuk didn't listen to him, and Baruta said that based on the specifics of their country, tuberculosis comes to mind. It can't affect the inner walls of the abdomen like that. It's characteristic for cancer. Soo-hyuk got angry because he just said that it's not cancer. Baruta said not to pay attention. The information is still being processed. But Soo-hyuk was hard not to pay attention, and Baruta asked not to force him to talk, because he is already overloaded and hard. At this time the man continued to tell something. Baruta continued, there was tissue necrosis, and the use of contrast agent showed inconsistent results. Soo-hyuk asked, isn't that a sign of cancer? And Baruta said he didn't make him study for nothing. Besides, look at the pelvic area. There is a contraceptive installed in the uterus. Soo-hyuk didn't understand what it was for. An intrauterine contraceptive. So what? If you haven't figured it out by now, you still have a lot to learn, said Baruta. Soo-hyuk didn't understand what he was saying, and the man went on to say that's why he meant. Then noticed that Soo-hyuk didn't listen to him at all, and he said that he was listening. Baruta began to ask Soo-hyuk to try to remember. The CT scan showed signs characteristic of cancer, but it's an infectious disease. The man asked to retell what he said, and noticed that he was ignoring him. The Baruta continued that this disease was related to intrauterine contraception, and frankly, he should have guessed by now. Is the head on your shoulders designed only to hold me? Asked the Baruta, and at that moment Soo-hyuk realized what it could be. Actinomycosis is an infectious disease transmitted to humans from domestic animals, which made the man go into a stupor. We are moved to another place where the professor apparently noticed that his phone was ringing, and the principal said he told him to turn his phone off when they went to play golf. Thank goodness, they are in the food tent now. This is even more uncivilized than the sound of the driver on impact. How can a major hospital doctor turn off his phone? Especially since he has an out-of-hospital duty today. Off-hospital duty? When did you come to play golf with the director? What does that have to do with the director? We are here as senior and junior. Am I wrong, Professor Kim? Kim Jin-shil has been appointed Professor of Diagnostic Abdominal Radiology at Daewon Medical Center this year. Oh, it's Soo-hyuk calling, Lee Soo-hyuk? Wondered the director. Why is this kid calling when we're playing golf? And this man wondered who he even was. What was actinomycosis? Again brought up some strange disease. More importantly, did Shin Hyung-tae tell him personally about the patients in the infectious disease department? First-year professor? And it's still only March? Is he really the headmaster's secret son? Thought the man, and at that moment Soo-hyuk just managed to call the professor. Soo-hyuk began explaining that he was calling about a patient in the emergency room and asked if the professor could speak. The professor started to tell the director to judge for himself. He says so politely, "Does it look like a crazy person?" But the director said they don't know that yet. He said he would be free for another half hour, and asked the principal if he was okay with it, to which he said to do as he knew, because he hadn't had breakfast today anyway, so he was hungry. 45-year-old woman experienced pain in the stomach area for a month and lost weight, was examined at another hospital after finding a tumor in the right side of the colon, the ascending colon, was admitted to the emergency department of their hospital. Thanks for watching. If you want part 2, like, subscribe to the channel, and share this video with your friends.